Marissa and I are really glad to have you here. We're going to be talking about you, the doctor.
Okay.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is something that's really near and dear to my heart, and as a chiropractor, it's something that my profession has been beating the drum for almost 130 years now.
Mm-hmm.
That we as humans are in charge, and very rarely are we victims of our circumstances. Sometimes, and we'll talk about that. So, I'm Dr. Will. I'm a chiropractor, a nutritionist, a foodie, a health evangelist. I get pumped to do stuff like this. I love it. I love teaching people about these mind-blowing concepts, because to me they're pretty mind-blowing. So, doctors, thanks for coming. Thanks for being here. So my first question is who are you? And so that's maybe the question, very philosophical question. People have been talking about this since there have been people. So we're not going to get quite into that level, but food for thought. So biologically speaking, we are made up of a community of cells that are all working together, living, dying, reproducing, and communicating with each other every nanosecond of every day of our entire lives. 50 to 70 trillion cells make up our body. We're mostly water, but the cells are mostly water, so it only makes sense that that would be the bulk of our being. So that's kind of a tough number to wrap your mind around, and so when I was putting this talk together, I was thinking, well, how can we make this a little more real? Because I mean, 50 trillion, that's outrageous. So if we were going to put that into $100 bills, we'll start with a stack of $100 bills that equal $1 million. So about 1.5 feet tall, pretty manageable. We could fit that in a suitcase. So if we had a stack of $100 bills that made up $1 billion, it would be as high as the Sears Tower. If we had a stack of $100 bills that equaled 70 trillion, it would be about 20,000 miles. So almost wrapping around the entire Earth. So that's us. There's a lot going on there. But the crazy part about it is there are around, and I mean, obviously if you're talking in the trillions, you have to round. Around 100 trillion bugs, bacteria, just in our gut alone. Over 5 pounds. So there's 100 trillion of them just in the gut. That doesn't count our other mucous membranes, our eyes, our skin, our nose. We're getting into some really big numbers. Many, many, many more of them being bacteria, yeast, different little critters that most people are a little grossed out about. Way more of them than there are of us. So, my question is, does it really make sense to wage war on these guys? And to try to sanitize and antibiotic them out of existence? There's more of them than there is of us. So, when we're talking about the human body, what we're really talking about is, I know, it's kind of crazy to ponder. What we're really talking about is an ecosystem, right? So I have Louis Pasteur here. He was a French scientist. You might have heard of pasteurization, where you kill all the bugs and all the good things in live foods and milk and stuff like that. he's the guy who really pushed germ theory. The idea that these bad germs invade us and they make us sick. He was wrong. A lot of our perception of disease in the Western world is based off of this guy's thinking. Now, interestingly enough, it's rumored that on his deathbed, he said, "I was wrong. The microbes are nothing. It's all about the terrain." So it's the environment, right? And we'll get into environment a little more as we go. So we are an ecosystem, like I mentioned. This is fairly new understanding when you're talking about the gut microbiome and the skin biome and all these bugs that we're constantly in contact with. When you get into farming and organic farming, they focus on the soil. The bugs, the fungi, the nematodes, all the little invisible critters that make up this community that grows good food and produces good meat. So, in medicine and in science, when they started to understand what we're talking about today, they had to invent a new word. And so that word is the holobiont, which basically means the host organism, which would be us, and all the symbiotic, meaning friendly, coexisting creatures that inhabit us and in a lot of ways take care of us. And this is something that's constantly changing. So they've done some research recently that is showing that some strains of bacteria in our guts have, you could say, evolved, adapted, whatever word you want to use. They have changed themselves to be able to process dry cleaning fluid and protect us from that. So in all the generations of people that have been on Earth, there's very few that have had to deal with dry cleaning fluid. But these guys, who are turning generations over much faster than we are helping us to deal with these things. So it's not even, well, we're kind of feeding them and we're taking care of them and we're really friendly for letting them live there. They're protecting us. And it's really kind of amazing when you start thinking about the bacteria that have been passed down from mother to daughter since the beginning of time. These guys are a part of us. And it speaks to a bigger connectivity in our universe where you really can't separate one part from the other. The idea that we can separate ourselves from germs and from nature and from the cosmos is really a dangerous idea. There's a lot of connectivity. So my question to you guys is, if you're an ecosystem, then what kind of ecosystem do you want to be? Do you want to be an ecosystem that's barren, devoid of life, full of chemicals and garbage? Or do you want to be more like the pristine mountain meadow, clean water flowing through, you see a lot of greenery, there's probably some animals in there somewhere, full of life, right? So we really need to think about ourselves as a community, because we have a lot of little critters that work with us, take care of us, and live with us. And we pass them down to our children through the birth process. And this is something that's been going on with no knowledge, no input from humans since there have been humans, until very recently when we decided that we were just going to start bombing them and wiping them off the face of the earth. I see Purell and the hand sanitizer and I just cringe. I'm like, oh, I don't want any part of that. So, what kind of ecosystem are you? What kind of home are you providing for these guys? So the other thing I want to talk about is genetics. Okay, so there's a lot of confusion about genetics. There's this ever-present idea that genes matter when it comes to our health. You hear it all the time. Oh, you're at high risk because it's genetic. It runs in your family. I have a family history of X, Y, or Z. So very rarely is that the case. The idea is that we're kind of, life's like an egg timer. When we're born, the egg timer starts, and we just tick away the minutes, completely devoid of control until it buzzes, and then that's it. So that is a very primitive, and now it's really debunked, but it's still being pushed. And we'll get into why in a minute here. So I hear it all the time. Oh, well, it runs in your family, so you need to be... That's very rare. So I mentioned those rare instances. There are very few diseases that are direct links to faulty genes. We're talking about cystic fibrosis, Huntington's disease, and not many others. So most people have heard of cystic fibrosis or Huntington's. Those are genetically driven. That is a very small minority. So, I have it up here on the slide. 3% of your health story is told by your hardware, the genes. And there literally are not enough genes to prove the model, the theory that our life is just at the mercy of our genetics, and whatever is coded in our DNA, we're doomed to live out. An earthworm has more protein coding genes than a human being. So there's obviously some kind of disconnect in that line of thinking. Now, there's kind of an agenda behind this idea, and there have been some lawsuits that came out that opened up the tobacco industry, their internal memos, their agendas to the public. And so these are stored at a university in California. You can go take a look at them. It's been uncovered recently that in the 60s, basically, people started getting lung cancer at kind of an alarming rate. And the tobacco industry said, well, we got to find a scapegoat, because if people find out that cigarettes give them lung cancer, then they won't buy cigarettes. And so there were two guys, Watson and Crick, who discovered DNA. They won a Nobel Prize for it. Brilliant guys. This was kind of a new thing. And so they said, let's identify genes that cause cancer. And there was a lot of money and a lot of political weight behind this. And a lot of it is, if we can blame it on the genes, then we don't have any responsibility. If you're a chemical company, you would love to blame cancer on genes. If you're a tobacco industry, you would love to blame lung cancer on someone's genetics, their family history. There's been a lot of money spent on this, a lot of momentum behind it, and it's come up with absolutely nothing. So they have done genetic studies on everything from educational prowess, saying, well, it's not the schools are better in certain areas, it's that certain populations of people have stronger thinking genes. And it's not that the economics of an area are depressed and that's why people are poor, they're genetically poor. And this genetic rabbit hole goes really deep, and it's really just a shift of blame onto something that people will ignore what's really going on. And it's kind of sinister, but it's the truth. And honestly, they've come up with nothing. Nothing. And one of the ones that's very famous right now is the BRCA gene for breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
There are women who are undergoing surgeries to prevent this. There's a link there to breast cancer. Less than 10% of breast cancer cases are linked to that faulty gene edit. So we have people who are getting so hysterical over their genetics that they're mutilating themselves to prevent something that probably is not going to affect them anyway. And this is being pushed in all kinds of circles, and it's really kind of sad. But when people understand that the DNA is not the answer, that gives them a lot of control over what's going on. So, if it's not our genes, what is it? It's the environment. 97% of our health story is told by environmental factors on our DNA. And so this is a new field called epigenetics. So epi is a prefix that means above. And so these are higher influences on our health story than just the raw hardware. So an easy way to remember it: genetics are what you have, what you're born with. Epigenetics are what you do to those genes. And they're finding that different things turn genes on and turn genes off. For instance, when you exercise, thousands of protective genes are activated by that. By the same token, when you start getting into stuff like environmental toxins and different chemicals, they turn off protective genes and they prove to be harmful. So it works both ways. So this is a new field, and it's so exciting, and it's breaking news, and it's just, the most exciting breakthrough in health since whatever, penicillin. And that's true, it is exciting, but this is not a new concept. This is Dr. Goodhart. He's a chiropractor. He didn't call it epigenetics, but he was talking about environmental influences in the 60s. So, way ahead of his time. And if he was alive today, I'm sure that he would just be smiling at all the mainstream scientists that are proving with study after study that he was right. And it really has to do with our environment. So, another influence that is hardly ever mentioned is the control of our own mind over our health story. And so your mental impulses are electrical, they are measurable. When they put those little electrodes on people's heads and then they show them different pictures, or they show them a piece of chocolate and they see what lights up, this is an electrical, measurable force. It's not an abstract product of consciousness. We can't separate the mind from the body. And when we produce mental impulses, they communicate with all 50, 70 trillion cells in our body. And I would propose that when those impulses that they can measure on the surface of your scalp, when they're emitted, do they stop? Or do they keep going out into the universe, out into the room, to the person next to you? That's a great question. And it's a very deep thing to ponder. Where do your thoughts go when they leave your area of control? I would argue that they keep going. They're influencing things around us. They're influencing the cells in our body. We can give those guys instructions. And this is not some mystical crystal person religious idea, this is widely recognized. This is another guy who's ahead of his time. He's a modern day guy. Thank goodness he's still with us and still teaching. His name's Bruce Lipton. He's a PhD, he's a cell researcher, and he is brilliant. And he's bringing to light the influence that our thoughts and beliefs have on our physiology. So, to kind of tie this into something that makes sense to pretty much everybody, we'll talk about the placebo effect. So most people know about the placebo effect. When they run double-blind, randomized, controlled clinical trials, they have a sugar pill, which is basically inert, nothing to it, versus the chemical that's supposed to actually do something. So placebo, pretty familiar, right? Basically, you think it's going to be good for you, and so it actually is. It's interesting to me because they have a lot of trouble bringing new drugs to the market, because when they do these randomized clinical control trials that are supposedly the pinnacle of scientific rational thinking, the chemicals oftentimes have a hard time beating the sugar pill. And a lot of times the sugar pill beats the chemicals. Because at least if somebody's using their own thoughts to affect their physiology, they're not being poisoned by whatever experimental concoction the test group is getting. So the placebo effect is something that everybody knows about. And when you tie that to what I told you about Dr. Lipton and the things that he's exposing and educating on, our thoughts absolutely have an effect on our health and well-being. And I would argue the health and well-being of the people around us. And that's where you get into the the idea that your thoughts don't stop when they leave your skull, they keep going. And I talk to people about this all the time, and people recognize that there are certain folks who are very negative and they carry a dark cloud around them, and when they enter the room, the air just leaves. Conversely, there are people that when they walk in the room, everybody comes up. They energize things. So it's not just about you and your health, it's about the ones around you, the people you love, the folks that you're near. So, placebo. I think it's good, therefore it is good. A little bit less well known is the nocebo effect. So the nocebo effect is the opposite. You think something's going to hurt you, and so it does. And I have it hit right here in red. I think it's going to be bad, I know it's going to be bad, and so the body makes it so. So when I was in school, we had a professor, a brilliant guy, his name was Dr. LaRose. He was a medical doctor, and he had been all over the world, in the trenches. Third world countries, he worked for the UN. I mean, the guy, he was like the most interesting man in the world. And he told me a story, and the rest of my class, he told us a story about nocebo that has always stuck with me. So, there is a guy who was part of a clinical trial. It was a trial for antidepressant medication. So this gentleman is depressed. He decides that it's not worth it. He doesn't want to live anymore. And so he takes a whole bottle of the pills that they gave him in the clinical trial. Fast forward to the emergency room, where the doctors and the nurses are trying to revive him. They put the pieces together from the first responders that this is a suicide attempt. His heart rate is flatlining. He's stopped respiring, breathing. He's on his way out. And they're trying to figure out what is it that he took. So they contact the name of the person running the clinical trial from the bottle, and they say, look, you know, this guy's on his way out. What is he on? What did you give him? They looked it up and they said, he's on the sugar pill. He's in the placebo group. And so they tell the guy, look, you just took a whole handful of sugar pills, dude. And like magic, he comes back. So he was literally on his way out. And it wasn't the experimental antidepressants that did that to him. That was his own mind. And so as good as the placebo effect can be for people, the nocebo effect can be equally as harmful. And so this is one that you can add to your vocabulary, a little more esoteric, but it's really just as important. So, my question is, what is a doctor? What do you think a doctor is, Kenya?
Someone who has the knowledge to determine what's wrong with me and come up with a plan to help fix it.
Okay, so that's really good. And I'd say probably a little advanced from your average American. I've made some progress, so that's good. So most people think, you know, the doctor is someone who fixes me. The doctor is someone who, like you said, tells me what's wrong and gives me something for it, or cuts something out of me to help me out, or, you know, maybe they have some very stern advice for me. That's what most people think of as a doctor. And so as far as the common perception of doctor, that's you. You're the one who identifies that there's a problem. You're the one who, when the problem is identified, takes steps to correct it. And at the end of the day, you're doing all the work. So you can insert your picture right there as the doctor. All right? I will tell you what doctor means at its root. It's from the Latin docere, which means to teach. So doctor means teacher. And I would propose that your doctor is more like your coach. So we got Michael Jordan. Most people know him and know that he was arguably the greatest who ever played the game. That's his coach, Phil Jackson. Now the other guy that enters the conversation a lot of times is Kobe Bryant. Not a coincidence, I think, that he had the same coach, right? So any person who has achieved a high level of success has had someone nudging them along, coaching them, giving them advice, encouraging them, constructive criticisms, a coach. So I'm, as a chiropractor nutritionist, very interested in ancient methods and natural methods. And I find it really kind of neat when you look at traditional Chinese medicine, which is the oldest form of medicine on earth. Traditionally, you paid your doctor when you were well. And you would pay him basically a salary, and he would give you tips and advice and things to keep you feeling good and feeling healthy. When you got sick, you quit paying him because he hadn't done his job. You say, hey, doc, what the heck? I'm sick, man. What are you doing? You're not getting paid until I'm well. And so I tell people that, and they're like, wow, that would never work here in America. You know, you go on about your merry way, and then when things really start crashing down, all of a sudden you have to shell out unbelievable amounts of money to get back on track. But traditionally, doctors were, like you said, people who had done a lot of studying, had an intimate knowledge of the workings of the human body and spirit, and they were paid to keep people well. So I think that is the future of medicine. Not a coincidence that it's also the past. But traditional Chinese medicine has kept a lot of people healthy for a long time. Thousands of years. Way before Louis Pasteur decided that it was all about destroying germs and viruses. So, doctor means teacher. That's why I'm here today. That's why I get so excited about giving talks like this, putting this message out there. I feel like it's very empowering. I hope that you have come to understand that you have a ton of control over what's going on. Even just what you're thinking and your daily affirmations, huge, huge effect on our health. And, you know, the bottom line is, you're the doctor. You're doing all the hard work. This is a really depressing message for people who enjoy being victims. And I'm sorry, but that is an issue for another time and place and another person, another teacher. I find this message to be really empowering and really exciting, and to think that just the things that you're thinking and telling yourself can radically change your health outlook is huge. And so on the patient end, I would like to see more of a partnership in general between doctor and patient. And I think that if we adhere to the principles that have kept us going as humans since, I mean, Lord only knows how long time, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of generations, people have moved through the world successfully by recognizing that they're part of nature, they're part of a bigger universe, and that the things that they're thinking and doing are ultimately the deciding factors. So, health is a journey, and the patient is the one who's doing the hiking. The doctor just gives them the roadmap, makes sure they know where the sand, quicksand, and the slippery places are. And like any exciting trail, there's ups and downs, and it's not all roses, but there's a real sense of accomplishment when you turn your health around and when you make positive changes in your life. And I just want everybody out there to know, and you to know, that I'm here to be a doctor in the traditional sense, as a teacher, as a coach, someone to help you along the way. And I recognize that you're doing all the hard work. What I do is not a job. It's a calling. It's very fun for me. I get a huge kick out of this kind of stuff. And I want to be there to encourage and support my patients, who are really my partners. So I really appreciate your time. And, you know, I'm open to any questions. If you guys want to reach out to me on social media with questions that you come up with later, that's fine. That's one of the cool things about our modern age, is we have a lot of connectivity. And just like all the cells in our body can communicate with each other and do communicate, now we have this global communication that's really exciting. This is an exciting time to be alive. And I just hope that we can spread the message and introduce people to new parts of their vocabulary, and just let people know that they're in control. So, thank you so much for your attention. I'm really excited to have you guys here today.